Sorry, that was a very nice introduction. And rather than waiting on our Sorry, that was a very nice introduction, and rather than waiting on the computer and projector to talk, I might just get started into it, and I'll swap back to the slides as we go along. What I'm really working on at the moment for this particular project is the idea of reconstructing the history of Malaysian Sikh migration, because it's largely problematic because there's not a lot of written documentation describing this experience. Additionally, there was substantial amounts of confusion over the classifications used in official records. I'm sure most of you recall at some point being called Bengalis. Well, that was from the classifications on the ships, because they assumed the ships came from Calcutta, therefore everyone on it was a Bengali. And there's also been quite an absence of Sikh presence in the Indian Ocean littoral narratives that scholars have been working on of late. Consequently, because of this, the history of the Sikhs in Malaysia relies heavily on early census data and research from the archives when material was available. The migration of the Sikhs to the federated Malay states actually originates with the reification of Khalsa orthodoxy, the idea of martial prowess and Jat hegemony following the 1857 mutiny in India. And this is really where our story starts with the Sikhs in Malaysia. Now, just to briefly tell you a little bit about me so you understand where I come from and why I'm doing this. I did my PhD in Malaysia studying the Sikh Khalsa. I wanted to look at one community and figure out why a Sikh community, your visible minority in a country where there's a Muslim majority, the Chinese are seen to be businessmen with all money, then you have this whole narrative of indentured labor from the Tamils, yet the amount of known knowledge about Sikh experience, not research and census data and numbers and figures, but actual experience, what it was like to live in the federated Malay states, to grow up here, what it was like to form an attachment to this country rather than going back home to Punjab. So my project was based on oral history interviews predominantly and photographs, and I studied a whole bunch of people who lived in Kuala Kangsar and were born sort of what I call the liminal generation, in between times, before there was an independent India and before there was an independent idea of Malaysia. They were largely second and third generation in this country, and it was interesting to look at the way they viewed their life in Malaysia and how they built the community up. With this, when I submitted my thesis, one of my main things was when I started my thesis, part of the reason I picked this topic because I read 3 books on the Sikhs in Malaysia that describe the original migrants of the Sikhs in Malaysia as being illiterate, uneducated, and working largely in bullock carting or the police. No variation, yes? Just these 2 professions. And that bothered me, because I'd grown up hearing stories from my grandparents that had a huge variety of people who worked in different occupations. And the people they knew, my great-grandfather, the other families in the towns they lived in, they hadn't come uneducated. They'd gone through at least primary education before enlisting. A lot of them had actually gone to English schools in some of the bigger villages in their little area. So this idea of an uneducated Sikh military person, loyal to the British, not being able to think for himself, that bothered me a lot. And I wanted to change this narrative, which is where I started my work. When I finished my doctorate, I applied for a postdoc at the University of Nottingham. As after I just mentioned, the government in the UK has decided that the narrative of British history about World War I is very incomplete, because we're ignoring all these other people that participated, that contributed. Sorry, excuse me. I don't know. Once I've been in, it automatically turns on. I can do that. Sorry. This is all the lovely people in IT do for me. I apologize for the interruption, but I'm really IT illiterate. report. The computer thinks it's connected because it's swapped to the dynamic screen. Are you paused at the moment as well? Okay. Shall I continue in the background a little bit? Rather than keeping you all waiting, I'll keep talking for a little while. So I applied for this postdoctorate, and what I applied for was to study the contribution of Sikhs in Malaysia to World War I. Now, my mandate for this is not a normal academic research. I'm not expected to produce a paper from this or monograph. What the whole point of this postdoc grant is actually to actively engage with the communities being studied and find a way to make a memorialization or commemoration about their participation. I'm particularly interested in alternative stories beyond the Malay State Guides going to Aden, though all of those are welcome because most of the stories we have about the State Guides in Aden come from field diaries of commanding officers who were British. So there's not necessarily always the perspective from the Sikh population themselves. The postdoc allows me a certain leeway about how I work, and part of what I thought it would be sensible to do was if I was going to be recording World War I stories anyway, why not record all the Sikh history? And what I want to do is record a Sikh history that comes in a form that is easily accessible, easily understood. This should be something that a 10-year-old could log onto a website, read and find out something about their history. This should be something that really will be enough transcripts in the back end. There will be photographs that an academic from anywhere could delve into and say, I want to research this topic and start using the material. The point is to make this widely accessible. So it's not just us that know our histories, but everyone else. Sorry. 2 seconds. And now I'm a little bit lost without my notes, so I'll just continue. The idea is to build a digital archive. A lot of material in the Malaysian archives at the moment are either restricted. For example, if you go and ask for the file in the Malay State Guides, you'll be told, I'm sorry, you can't have it. You need to go and ask permission from the PMO's office. Which to me is a little bit odd. This is our history. It should be widely available in archives and accessible to anyone who fills in the form requesting a visiting researcher pass even for the day. However, luckily for us, at the time, a lot of copies were made. So they sent the files to the archives in the UK. So the Colonial Office Archives has these files. And the other problem with Malaysian archives is you have a problem of what the national narrative at that particular moment in history is. It changes constantly, as some of you might remember from reading your history books when you went to school, to what your grandchildren tell you in their history books now. The way a country develops, you always have people in power defining what history is, what history means, because this is how you build a national identity. You define it through how you teach history. Part of this means some populations get left out, like ours. I particularly find it quite conflicting an idea that we have so much variety in our community. And when we are written about in newspapers today, when we're written about in history books, when we're written about, we are referred to just as Indians. And London is one homogeneous category, everyone the same. No different stories, no different experiences. And the experience of the Sikhs themselves is so varied and so distinct that it needs some form of recognition, some form of recording, and some form of ability to reflect on our own story here. A lack of access to materials means we don't have the freedom to do this. So this project is kind of my little pet baby to create a way that anyone who's the least bit interested in Malaysian history could log on and find out what were the different types of forms that people came, what were your stories of origin, how did people migrate, was it with the army, was it with Captain Speedy, how did they come here? Did they come here because a friend told them it was great here and they moved here, or cousins? How did they actually get here? What was their journey like? All these stories. And these are stories that are generally handed down in families. When I was doing my research for my PhD, because I was working and interviewing families, I would get stories that came from grandparents or great-great-grandparents that had then been handed down the line. The stories change over the time if you track back one generation before, but there's still the essentials. Ooh. Halfway there? I might pause for 2 seconds because now I will want my slides a little bit and my notes. So far, does anyone have any questions? Or is there anything I'm skipping over in a very brief introduction? No? Exactly, and this is what we don't have. Yes. I interviewed a tailor, a cloth merchant, a couple of transport industries, so the bullock carters. Also, there was a flour miller as well. So under that, there's this great variety of professions that people came under. There's this idea that we tend to ignore in history, the female position. And all the stories we hear about migration are how the men came here. We rarely find out how the women arrived here. My grandmother came after she married my grandfather. Not a lot of detail. And this is one of the things it would be great to try and correct, to include all these different perspectives in the whole story of the Sikhs in Malaysia. The other thing a lot of stories neglect is the history. When did you come? Did you come, or did your family come here, go back, come here again? All these return journeys. Did they visit home? What was the interaction with home like? How did they decide that they were going to stay here? These are what needs to be captured, and this is kind of why I'm really glad there's a lot of you here today. Thank you. Okay, part of the origins of the postdoc I did was that there was this think tank on British futures, and they assembled a group of people to participate in research about the knowledge of the First World War. And from this, there were quite a lot of surprising results. Commemoration was seen as important. Here we go. Yep. And there's some key moments that should be considered. And during this meeting, surprisingly, they start at the end. They talk about the start and the end and some of the big battles. And one person actually said, yes, especially D-Day. Now, no one corrected him. People kind of do confuse the First World War with the Second World War a lot. Because really, when we think about it, the second is what lives comfortably in our living memory. We're used to the Hollywood movies about it. We're used to the books about it. And it has a distinct and obvious bad people. The First World War, on the other hand, is a lot less clear. Aside from the causes of some very nasty business in Sarajevo, which was complicated, as word aims, it's now considered to be not much more than a colossal, murderous mistake. And although this clarity of this view is being challenged now, the idea is that not just historians, but the general public take an interest and to stop reducing the World War to familiar tropes, which are what are illustrated here. Poppies, the land is steel, the over by Christmas things, your country needs you. And as you will notice, none of these photos actually shows a non-white, who were quite major participants in the First World War. The idea was we set up different engagement centers under this grant, and each center was really defined by the research themes adopted. In the case of Nottingham, the idea was to look at an international focus rather than focusing specifically on British populations. There's a whole bunch of different centres, and I will be putting links up on the blog for you to have a look at, just to have an idea of what we're actually working on. These are the members of my centre, and here the commemorative projects are usually regional or locally focused, with the exception of Nottingham. We're trying to promote further investigation of those that fall outside the central narrative, so battles and campaigns that are not just the Western Front. And we're one of the 5 engagement centres that has been set up to do it, and we have particular research themes. Of particular interest to the Sikh community here is the first, the second, and the final theme. We're thinking of this whole period of World War I not simply just as a period of war and conflict in the world, specifically the Western world, but we're also trying to think of it as quite an exciting and stimulating period for Asian awakenings in general. Not really nationalism per se, but in and out of itself, as that began to take off after World War I, you have this period where the Asian colonies are starting to be quite self-aware and questioning the world order. There was a very excellent piece addressing the fallacy of the Malay Sikh guides and Sikh involvement in the mutiny of 1915 in Singapore, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. There was a mutiny that was allegedly the Gada party, and that the state guides participated and were mutineers and were punished. This was the original myth. That's not actually true. The state guides were very quickly marched out of Singapore before the full mutiny went on. There was a couple of Muslim brigades that were there, and also some brigades from India that were actively involved. But Tim Harper wrote this piece, and he ended his essay saying, "It was a sense of time between empire and nation, of the spaces beside empire and nation, and of an Asian underground that has the potential to turn empire inside out." Following on from this, I'm hoping to continue the project to think about looking for not just this idea of Sikh origins, Sikhs during this period, but any interesting people, women and men, who traverse this whole variety of transnational routes, moving between places, whether they came from the Punjab and returned for holidays, whether they travelled on and migrated to Australia or the UK, the movement, the letters that went back and forth through the sea routes. Just this idea of not sticking with the conventional idea of what Malaysia is as the national boundary. What I think is really important is not to ignore the Malaysian Sikhs who have left Malaysia, but to include their story in this narrative as well. And looking at the idea of hidden histories, which you all have heard at the start of this presentation, I'm going to start talking about it in terms of my project. So what do we mean by hidden in the title of my centre, for example? The images that have created what we call a conventional narrative of the First World War, really France, Belgium, mud, bullets, shell shock, and quite a lot of poetry, surprisingly. And the common image of the combatant in the war remains this skinny Tommy in his drab uniform with his helmet and his puttees, often working class, and almost every single time white. As you can see from the pictures. How many people would actually know that the first shot fired by a British soldier was fired in Africa by an African, or that every 6th member of the British Army was from the Indian subcontinent? Would they even be able to guess? While this narrative that we know is not factually incorrect necessarily, the strength of this idea of this white British Tommy is so strong that we miss out on all the nuances and characters that were involved that are not from this population. And we need to understand what centenary commemorations mean for people, not just people who remember Wilfred Owen. So we are working within the community and with heritage groups to help bring these hidden histories into the mainstream. And luckily for me, I met this group who was quite passionate about the idea of Sikh history and bringing it to public knowledge. If you want a question and a talk, just wave so I notice you, because I tend to flip. As my work was on World War I memories in the Malaysian Sikh community, and this is really quite a narrow view of the extent and contribution and history of the community in Malaysia, so I proposed to work together with my institute and the community group to collect as many varied stories, memories, photographs, oral history, interviews, videos, medals, books, anything, documents, letters, anything that anyone has held in their families that they are willing to share with the general public. The Sikh presence in contribution to Malaysia, as well as their history and culture, remain quite largely outside this curve of what our national narrative is. Now, just to let you know, the man on the left is Wilfred Owen. Some of you may remember this from English literature once upon a time. And the man on the right is a Daffodar from the 14th Murray's Jack Lancers of the Indian Army. One in every 6. 1 in every 6 from the Indian subcontinent, and you add, I think it was 1 in every 10 for Africans, for example. I can't remember, there was a very small group of Chinese, but I don't remember the statistics, and also Vietnamese. I actually refer to them in my work predominantly as the federated Malay states, the Straits settlements, and the unfederated Malay states. But it's for simplicity that I use Malaysia now, because it kind of applies to capture this whole territory that we're speaking of. At the time, yes, I would prefer to include Singapore in this narrative, but they already have quite a lot of material, so it's quite easy for me to pull stuff from their archives or this newspaper archives, for example. Sabah and Sarawak at the moment is not in my remit because they weren't involved. But you can understand just from this discussion why I said my project is so narrow, and I thought it was important to broaden it out and include all Sikh histories. So this way we get to capture these narratives, as you mentioned, from Labuan, the different stories from Kota Kinabalu and other parts of Sabah and Sarawak, and look across the board, not just my little narrow field. Yep. Okay, so see, something like this is something that would be really good. Because for me, I never knew anything about the Sikhs in Labuan until I read, I think it was Professor Sarjit's short articles on it. And yep, there are actually quite a lot of Sikhs in Thailand and Indonesia and Burma. There's all populations, as well as the Philippines. So, okay, that would be great, because then I will be talking at the end about how to upload them, and how you can post them yourself and tag them and which category they belong to, and you can write something about the photographs, so we all get an idea of what you've seen and what they meant to you as well. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, I apologize. The initial question was to ask what was counted, what my research was addressing, and how I was calling it Malaysia. So that's where the answer about the federated Malay states, etc. The next question was asking what about Sabah and Sarawak, and I explained part of that was why I needed to expand this project to make this whole archives. So it included and captured all these different varied histories from the different states, different places, including Singapore to some extent, because the material does belong in the Malaysian Sikh history as well. This gentleman nicely added to the topic that he'd seen quite a lot of material in the Labuan Museum about the Sikh history there, so we were just chatting about that for a few minutes. Did I miss anyone? I'm so sorry. Yep. Okay, one of my favorite stories about Sikh origins in Malaysia was actually this idea. They always said they came out recruited by the British. And I was in Delhi researching in the archives. I'm sharing this story because I want to explain why archives are important and why people digging into history is important. So there was this man, Captain Speedy, and the Ministry of Larat said, oh, I'm having this great big problem with everyone fighting. I need a security force. So Captain Speedy, being an ex-Punjab officer who was used to working with Punjabis, decided, oh, well, my men were really great. I'm going to go see if I can get a few. So he traipsed them to the Punjab. He paid them, I think it was something like £2 for coming with him, and said, I will take 100 of you. And he marched them from the Punjab onto a train all the way to Calcutta. Nowhere in this process did the government of India or the government of the Straits Settlements actually know what was going on, up until the point he tried to get them on the ship. At which point there was a huge hue and cry, oh my god, we can't send our people overseas to fight for foreign rulers, this doesn't work. So then you have Captain Speedy sitting there waiting, paying a fine. So he got told, no, if you're going to keep the men here and you want to do this, you have to pay for their upkeep. So he sent about 25 to 30 of them home and kept 75. These original 75 eventually, because there was no legislation at this point in time saying that you couldn't recruit people from the Indian subcontinent to serve foreign powers. There was no limitation. So technically, anyone could have gone in there and hired mercenaries. So, no rule. He gets them on a ship. They come here. They start serving the Ministry of Larot. They very quickly put down the problems of the fighting factions of the Chinese. And suddenly the Strait Settlement thinks, oh, this is a great idea. So they keep going for quite a while. And eventually, this becomes the Malay State Guides. And also the first police force. Because then it gets taken over by Colonel Walker and the State Guides, and the police force by the various captains and colonels and officers. So this is how the police force starts in Perak, Selangor, and Singapore. From here, because, well, the first 75 people, obviously they were writing home. Now, I'd like to point out the phrase writing home. They were sending missives back home. Do tell me how these illiterate people were able to write. Yet, people were finding out about this great, some of you might have read Malkit Singh's Lopo's fiction, where he describes Malaysia as a land of milk and honey. They were finding about this great opportunity, great weather, land, work, steady employment for the government, your feet under the British government's table. They have to feed you your roti and give you your clothes. Come. So people started making their way here by themselves. And one amazing thing is, how did they get here? If you think about it, one, were they poverty-stricken? A lot of the narratives about migration from Punjab and why they moved to Southeast Asia or to Shanghai or Hong Kong or onwards was because allegedly they were so poor. Not necessarily. If you dig the stories again, dig the archives, interview families, ask them what they had. If you think about it, a lot of you probably know that your ancestors owned land in the Punjab. Now, all of the land they owned was small. So let's throw that poverty away and kind of go. I read a great book by Tony Ballantyne looking at the Sikh history and the imperial narratives. And one of his theories about why they moved was because there was an idea that why would you not move? Why would you not go and chase the idea of izzat, bettering your own izzat? And my father always says I pronounce this wrongly, so I will apologize in advance. But you have this whole history, and it's varied, it's funny, it's interesting. And can you imagine if we could encourage young kids to start reading this stuff, to learn where their ancestors came from, the stories? At least they could stand up there and say, and be proud, because when you read even the old textbooks, there's still this narrative of illiterate soldiers, poor, had to leave home. Why? Let's change that. And talking about when they come here, you very interestingly mentioned that talked a lot about police and military, but this isn't true. This is not all we had. People came from every industry. You had the transport industry, you had private security, you had dairy farmers, you had the Jat or the Zamindars, you had moneylenders, you had people who came in and sewed the uniforms for the various police forces. It's different, and again, not captured. Even the idea of caste. One thing I found very fascinating in my research was when I was interviewing people about caste. I'd read a lot of books about Sikhism in general, and the idea that caste was meant to be abolished under Sikhism, and that was one of the whole points that we took up the name Kaur and Singh, to get rid of our goats so you couldn't identify automatically what caste you were from. Yet, everyone kind of does know a little bit about their caste, or at least if you're over 40, you might know. Under that, I'm not sure anymore how it changes, but at least before that, you would have some idea. But the even funnier thing is that for the Malaysian Sikhs I've spoken to through the course of my research, caste isn't just this idea of Jat, Banya, Nai, whatever. They also considered Maja, Malwa, and Tuabe as caste. And nowhere else in the Sikh diaspora do they differentiate between the regions? You might have an idea of people being banded together because they all originated from the same village in migration, but the idea of segregation or thinking about segregation along those lines, pretty unique to Malaysia and Singapore. And one historian theorized that this comes from, funnily enough, the Malay State Guides, where they put them in two separate battalions. And then they had them compete each other every year for the shooting cup, for example. So you started this little bit of rivalry back in the 1890s, and it just kept going. And this idea of, I mentioned this earlier, hypermasculinity. When you look at popular images of the Punjab now, you tend to see this almost patriarchal portrayal of what a Sikh is. The big, strong guy. Tall, broad chest, can lift a cow. And this hasn't changed a lot from what the British decided was a great way to recruit people. For their recruitment processes, they decided that, oh, you must have a certain chest measurement. If your chest is not this wide, you don't get to become a police officer or military. And this is actually how you then got so many other industries here that were created by the Sikhs. Because all these people came in and they thought, okay, we'll try for this. When we don't get in, oh well, oh look, there's a business opportunity here. This particular police group needs food, or they need chappals made. No one talks about the Sikhs in Malaysia being innovative or entrepreneurial. Another thing we need to change. Okay, I should clarify. I have two bits of research. The one sorry. Yes. I keep mentioning my research, and what do I mean when I say my research? I'm referring to two separate pieces. The work I did for my PhD and the work I'm currently doing for my postdoctorate. For my PhD, I studied identity and belonging in Kuala Kangsar and tried to understand the way a community is created among the Sikh diaspora in that town. My postdoctorate, I'm looking at alternative versions of World War I, not just this general narrative of white commanding officers saying what the Sikhs were like in the field, or no one talking about what was actually happening in Malaysia at the time because, oh, we supplied a lot of rubber and tin to the war effort. So I'm trying to correct this because at the time, a lot of the tin mines, the transport for the tin mining was run by Sikhs. If we talk about rubber, there were quite a few rubber estates, large ones, that were owned by Sikhs. And this is what I'm hoping to uncover, all these hidden stories. What was life like for the women? The women who were left behind, whose husbands had gone off to fight in a war in the Middle East that really had nothing to do with them. How did they survive the period? At the time of World War I, women were largely restricted to the household. Who made the decisions? How did they work out what to do with their children? And this is where I find it quite fascinating. You literally have this gap about how women manage households in the absence of men. Yet, the Sikh community doesn't go backwards, yeah? We're always climbing up that socio-economic ladder. So, even when these gaps are on, someone must have been doing something right. Did I address that question? Yep. Okay, so what I want to try and think about is this idea that we're talking about early migration, so migrants who arrived in Perak, Penang, and Selangor between 1897 usually and the 1930s. And what is important, again, about tracking the Malaysian Sikh history, and especially this period, is because the population that came here arrived here before there was this great consolidation and change in the formation of Sikh identity in the homeland. Most of the work looking at what we understand as being Sikh now actually happened after 1910, almost as a reaction to first the British definition of what a Sikh was meant to be, self-definition, our own agency. What do we want our religion to be? The movement to define Sikhism against Hinduism. In 1917, it was still okay to say, I am a Sikh, and you were defined as being a Sikh if you were willing to stand in front of a group of people and say, I am a Sikh. I believe in the Guru Granth Sahib and I believe in the teachings of the Gurus. And that was all. All these normative categories and variations of what being Sikh meant weren't restricted to what we see here now. Eventually, in the homeland, this idea of through religious reform movements, all the social and political upheaval, and the continued period of British rule, these changes happened. How were they transmitted here? How did we learn about them and adopt them? And it's interesting to understand this movement of how the ways and the political thinking and the religious thinking transfers from the homeland to the diaspora here. How do we keep up? Were that many people going back and forth? We don't really know this yet. Yet all of us now understand the same idea pretty much everywhere around the world, that you are Sikh when you have a turban, for example. That's pretty much the most common identification even a non-Sikh would know. How does this definition happen? And what the idea of recording stories then means that you can track where this starts. Who heard about it first? How did it come here? Were there preachers coming across that we hired? Were people traveling back and forth? Were they sending us religious tracts from the various Khalsa Diwans and Naujawan Sabhas? And this is what I hope to do. This project will allow people to discover. Yep. Yes, I think, the gentleman pointed out that I missed a point to think about how we're also linked all over the world, which, being Malaysian, a lot of us know this idea. Our population at last census was about, off the top of my head, around 140,000, Malaysia-wide, yeah? If you look at the historical census movements of the Sikh population, we have to discard the early numbers because it's quite hard to track when you're missing a Sikh or when you're adding a Sikh, because of the different categories. Whether you were classified as Bengali, whether you were classified as Indian, it varies. But if you think of 140,000, I attended a seminar at the University of Malaya, and they were talking about Iranian immigrants. Do you know there's now more Iranian immigrants in Malaysia than there are Sikhs? And that means people are moving, because last I checked, the Sikh population was still having children, so where are our numbers going? It's this movement out of the country, what Malaysia refers to as a brain drain. That means the Sikh population steadily moved overseas. I know this is happening in the early 1950s because this is when people were going overseas for university. There was one university in Malaysia, a limited number of places, and if you didn't get a first class, you hadn't a prayer. So you have people exploring other options, different parts of India for schooling, different parts of the world. The Colombo plan starts up and you move, and not everyone came back. But this is the point. We want to capture their stories. How did they move on? What kind of communication did they continue back here? And thinking about the different ways our population, which is really interesting when you think about a diaspora. We have a population that thinks the best way is to think about how we will be successful. Our definition of what success means varies, but we are prepared to uproot ourselves, move in search of a better future for the next generation. In every instance, that's why our forefathers left and stayed here. That's why the next generation moves on. There's this idea of no need for a permanent home amongst the Sikh community in Malaysia. We don't necessarily need a place that we say, this piece of soil, this is my home anymore, as opposed to in the Punjab where you're very much defined on the piece of land you own or you farm or you live on. Here, that connection has become more tenuous. It's a bit more fluid. And this idea, I think this is important to talk about, to raise, to have people start thinking about. Sorry, I'm going to swap. Now, what am I doing with a roadshow? So, Sikh Heritage Malaysia is a digital history project that I'm working on with the Coalition of Sikh Organizations. We're trying to spread this as, yes? Yes? A question about the tenuous connection of the land and whether it's happening in other parts of the diaspora. What we tend to see in especially first world migration is a more fixed idea of what home is. The whole dream, if you think about it, is this dream to move where you are going to be successful, where you are in the West, you're going to succeed, you're going to take over the world. This idea is lacking when you live in what a lot of the world calls a third world country. So you're still searching for the next best thing when you're here. Therefore, you're less likely to be so attached to the idea of here than the idea of here is my friends, my family, my community. And it's okay to move because I'm still going to be connected. In the first world, it's less so. People tend to stay in their groups. If you think of the early Sikh migrations to the UK, for example, the areas they lived in, this changes slightly as they become more affluent, but to a large extent, when you have a community that's settled in a place where they are segregated in schools. They had buses sending them to different school areas because they didn't want to overload one school with too many brown people as opposed to white people. You start really thinking about your place, your footprint. Here, in contrast to that, a similar sense almost. See, I got taken to task in my PhD when I tried to say that I felt the Sikhs were disenfranchised in Malaysia, and was told this was a little bit too harsh a word. We can't say we're disenfranchised. We can't say we're marginalized. That you have no power to define your own position or your own agency. And this idea that we don't have any recourse. The reality is the Sikh population here, we might be a visible minority, but by and large, as a community as a whole, yes, there's still some parts of the community that does need help, but by and large, we've provided the help to our own. By and large, we've become successful despite almost all these hardships and challenges and discrimination. Instead of saying, okay, we can't manage this and we're just going to fall down, we found a way to make it work. Address the question? Sorry. So, Digital History Project. Basically, this means it's an archive. The same way you would think about the archive or a library, that's a building. What we're doing is creating one online. Eventually, when I'm back in the UK, whatever's up here is then going to be uploaded to servers, so it's also stored in a physical location. But the idea is to keep a presence that is easily accessible to anyone with an internet access. I am happy to address the issue of internet connectivity in Malaysia, to have this spread around by any Sikh magazine, any community organization who wants to print it off and distribute it. We're not instituting any copyright on this website because the idea is about sharing knowledge. What we're thinking about is a project that documents the people, the places, the events about Malaysian Sikh history through family photographs, memories, stories, artifacts. Did you bring a Guru Granth Sahib from home with you when your family came? Let's take a picture of that because it might be different to what's available elsewhere. Did you have a medal from your great-grandfather? Let's take a picture of that so it's recorded. Try and trace your great-grandfather's military records. This idea of making this accessible and create a digital portrait of the community in all its rich diversity for students, scholars, community organizers, amateur historians, really anyone in the general public has the least bit of interest on it. And, we hope this digital portrait is also going to serve as an educational resource for future generations, as the photos and stories and memories contributed today become tomorrow's history really quite quickly. And in partnership with the Coalition of Sikh Organizations in Malaysia and the University of Nottingham, we plan to organize public events to scan family and community photographs and videotape the stories behind the photos. All Malaysian Sikhs are invited to go through their photo albums, their scrapbooks, bring them to local roadshow, 2 or 3 photographs that they believe represent their family story, themselves, their identity, their history, and talk about them. And people can also directly upload online, but the point of a roadshow is to give you a chance to gather in a community, to talk about what you're all doing, to share your stories in one place, and also then to have lecturers from the university explain how you could take your own research into your family history further, how you can learn to use archives online, what different resources there are available. What happens at the roadshow is we have all these photographs of stories, letters, documents, whatever. We take photos we have student assistants. They'll photograph everything or help you and show you how to scan in case you choose to do it in future at home, and upload them directly to the website. We're also going to request that if contributors are willing and happy to share a 3 to 4 minute story about their photographs on camera, so we can add this to the photograph. And at the end, we take a keepsake photo to document their participation in the roadshow, and all these images and video are then indexed and incorporated to the archive and become searchable online. We also make sure this is accessible to any local organizations who are interested in having the material. And as Arthur Jeep said in today's WhatsApp, which I thought was a really great quote advertising the idea of this project, people become immortal when their stories are told. Stories of their heroism, achievements, struggles, etc. Some get their stories told by others, some do this themselves. Some die unknown, their stories remain untold. Have your ancestors been immortalized? Are their stories told? Not only your grandfathers, but your grandmothers as well, your parents, so on and so forth. I thought it was a great idea to think about what we're trying to do with this project. Now, roadshows usually used to describe an event where the members of the public are invited to bring all these memorabilia and stories, and what we're hoping to do with the first one that we have planned is to target and to work on this archive in phases and by themes. So for the first one, I would like to focus really on origins of the community in Malaysia. Think about family memories, how they arrived here up until the end of World War I, and talk about what the experience was like living in Malaysia at that time. So digging up all these memories, photographs, anything that you might have about that period from origins to say 1920. And then we upload to the Sikh Heritage Malaysia website, where they're available to anyone who wants to see them. Sorry. This is just a brief on what happens at the roadshow if you're interested in how it will work. Sorry, I might clarify. Today was meant to be an introduction to the project and to talk about what we're hoping to achieve. We will be planning a big roadshow, so the first one is going to be in autumn term, which is October. Sorry. So what can you do to help? This is the important part, because this is where all of you come in. Can you start collecting stories? If some of you already have stories that were written by your forefathers, let's get them together into some form of organization that you know that this story relates to this period in time. How did my family get here? And that's what we want to target for the first load of uploading to the website. You may choose to attend a roadshow in October and have someone help you do this, because we will have a lot of students standing around being very, very passionate about making sure every single thing you bring is photographed, scanned, and documented. Or you could upload directly to the website through a form that we place there. And I guess the big thing about this project is to make sure it gets across to every single person in the community, as much word spreading as you can do. Share it with friends, family, whoever you know. And the main aim of this is how you prepare, you write it down, or you record it. If I don't know much about other phones, because I have an iPhone, and I use this little program called GarageBand all the time to record lectures or my oral history interviews, and it's really simple. You tap an icon and you press record, and it records, and it's quite clear. Most phones have this facility. If you don't want to write it down, record it, and somewhere someone nicely paid by the University of Nottingham is going to transcribe this and make it into text, so it's also easily accessible. The idea is to contribute to this larger narrative tapestry of what the Sikh community in Malaysia is about. Yes. This is part of the agreement the university is working out with us. Eventually, the Sikh History Archive is one of the projects they're hoping to create. They will also be looking at other communities and thematic archives as well. So the idea is to build an online presence of Malaysian history that targets an alternative vision of history that's not necessarily covered in a textbook. Punjabi, we're still trying to figure that one out, because that we do have a problem. Unfortunately, the language center on the UK campus has one person that does Punjabi translations, and they're already in pretty high demand. So if any, and this is where the volunteering comes in, if any person is willing to volunteer to translate into English, even, I know sometimes, especially with the elderly, if you're sitting at home, you're not working anymore, stuff like this becomes interesting, and you don't have to write. Read it out and have some your grandkids show you how to record it, and done. Record it in English, we transcribe it. But and then the original Punjabi videos we will put up there, and eventually, hopefully, with enough volunteers who are willing to write it out, we can put the version in the Gurmukhi script as well. The idea is trying to make this as accessible as possible. I work predominantly in English because that's all my university education, but preserving the Punjabi writing and literature and language itself is also as important, which is why this idea of keeping the original videos in Punjabi to me is really valuable. Just we'll provide some way an English transcription. Eventually we will be asking for volunteers to get involved in the project. At the early stages now, it's literally just letting people know it exists. And over the next month and a half, we will start targeting specifically and putting notices out saying we're looking for people who are interested in sharing their knowledge on position A, position B. For example, I am so IT illiterate. Even doing the blog was a real challenge because usually I have nice student assistants at university to do this for me. This is the first time I did it myself, and I'm hoping someone in the community does want to get involved working on designing it to make it look a little bit more impressive from the front end. Now, just a quick run through, because I think this is important. I'm quite passionate about oral history work because I think the stories that people tell us, these aren't often recorded. And we tend to have a community that is quite based in oral history. We have stories passed down from our ancestors that we share about our own families, about our religious heroes, all these different variations of oral transmissions, and some way to capture them is great. I thought I'd run you quickly through what we refer to in academia as oral history, or what everyone else refers to as listening to their grandparents or their parents or their great-grandparents or great-uncles or whichever person speak. And to go out and then enable you to search your own stories within your family and your social networks. Now, this is just a brief thing on how you actually ask questions. When I started my PhD, I didn't realize there was a way you had to ask questions. And in my first interviews, the first 3 or so, someone would tell me something as they were talking, because I would usually start my interview with, "So, tell me about your life. Tell me like you were going to tell your grandchildren your family history." And they'd start, but they'd say something that I think was really interesting. So I'd immediately jump in and go, "Oh, tell me that." And then you lose their train of thought and the way they're thinking and the way they're narrating the story, what timelines they want to give it. So there are few key things that you do need to think about when you are collecting narratives or stories or recording someone. Try and start with, go in thinking you're going to address the theme. A good way is to say, what does anyone know about how our family came to Malaysia? And then that's your question, your title. At some point, write down what period they're talking about so you have a note of it and you know what year they came, roughly, ballpark. And where? Which part of the Punjab did they come from? Do they know what village they were from? Because all of this is quite interesting to then be able to track the maps. And if they're talking about an object, a lot of people tend to show you photographs as a prompt, for example, or a carving or a book, or something that has meaning to them. I got shown a fulkari, which it's the traditional the wedding where they hold over the heads, and it used to be handmade in the villages by the family, and now not so much, but the one I saw was. And these things, people tell you stories about them, and that was how I got the story of how a woman came to Malaysia to be a wife, and where she came from, because she talked to me about her fulkari, and then she expanded on, and this is what my family was, and this is how I met my husband, and this is how I ended up here. And people use objects as prompts, so always note down if they tell you about an object, take a photograph of it, really important, and ask how they came by it. How did they acquire the object? Who gave it to them? Or did they buy it themselves? Were they gifted it through a family member? These things are important to know because it gives you more of all the little nuances around a story. Not just the straight, I came from here, I got on a boat and I arrived here. It's the little details that are what we call hidden histories. This is how we fill in the gaps in what we know. As many of these little chips that go in. If there's any particular story talking about objects, who it relates to, where they get back to where it came from. When they're telling you about a person, is there anyone else who knows this person? Is there anything else known about them? Is it someone famous? I spoke to the grandson of Gurdwara Singh, who wrote that book, The Singer of Malaysia, in World War II. And for me, chatting to his grandson fills in a little bit of a gap that's not covered in the book. So you get a personal view of this figure. And to me, that all adds to, when you're talking about our community, the amazing variety we have in it and the amazing things we accomplish. It's the little details that make a difference. They make a story more human, and they make it more accessible to people who want to then dig further. Anything else anyone ever remembers about person or objects, and anything else? That's literally it. You spend most of the time in an oral history interview keeping very quiet and going, because when you interrupt, you stop the flow. If you interject, you stop the flow. The only time you interrupt is when they're done with a narrative, and you then look at what you have captured and think, I want to hear a little bit more about that. And then you ask after that. But the initial one, just point, record, sit, and enjoy. Because you always get served tea when you record. It's great. Good interview? Conversational. Really think of it as you are sitting with someone you know. This is fun. Let's just talk about that time. Remember when you told me about Grandpa and World War II? Simple, easy. Try and make sure you're comfortable. I know this is rarely mentioned. If you are sitting on a really awkward stool, you're going to be moving and being distracting to the person you're interviewing. Make sure they're comfortable too. I did a lot of my interviews for my PhD in people's homes, because that was where I felt they were most comfortable, and also because this is where they then had access to all these different objects that would prompt their memory. It's always a good place to start if people are happy to do so. Another great place I found was actually in the Gurdwaras itself, in the Langar Hall. Usually you find people sitting around. Most people who are sitting around also have memories about the place. For me, I remember escaping cousins' weddings and running down to hide in the Langar Hall and drink tea when I was about 5 or 6 and being with the bigger cousins. I had great times. Everyone has little memories about these places. You start with one memory, and it opens and unlocks the door to every other memory that you're trying to get. All of these, we want recorded, we want captured, we want shared as much as possible. Listening skills, good listener, talk less. Pretty straightforward. And lastly, good preparation. When you plan to go and interview someone or ask them about their stories, think about what you want to focus on first. If you try and get a whole life history, you will never do it in 1 hour. Every single person I know gets tired of talking after roughly about 45 minutes, and that last 15 minutes is generally just waffle and repeating. People get tired. Their memories get strained when they're tired. Go in with a plan. Say you want to tackle today just this period of time. Do you remember what happened when you were 10? Start from there. And they'll usually take you from 10 to about 15. But that's doable in an hour. More than that, not worth it. They'll never want you to interview them again, and then you don't get their stories anymore. Lastly, okay, this is the plan going forward. So, full roadshow. We were running an event on the UK campus tomorrow. Originally, we wanted to live telecast this and run it concurrently here, except we hit a great big hitch, which we never think about. In Malaysia, we have public holidays. Sadly, well before the public holiday, a lot of our staff decided it really wasn't a good idea to work a lot. We had problems with IT preparation for the link-ups because one of the main IT guys had decided to balik kampung 2 weeks early. We had a problem with the publicity department. They were busy publicizing the Chancellor's open house. All in all, it was a bad time. So we decided, rather than trying to do a slipshod, half-past effort, we would do it properly. When all our staff and students are back on campus to be used as resources. The UK has kindly recorded every single lecture they're going to run, and any seminars and question and answer sessions as well. So we will be putting them on a website to live stream during the period of this event. So usually I'd say we'll run it for a couple of days where you can watch the streaming anytime you want. But as well, we will have lecturers here talking about the different ways you can research history specifically in Malaysia if you're interested in digging up your family histories. As well, as I mentioned, we will have a roadshow, what I talked about. Guest speakers sharing their expertise about collection, preservation, and relevance of family histories and how you piece them together into larger historical narratives. And while the specific focus is on the time period of World War I, the same techniques and information apply to everything we're trying to do with the Sikh Heritage website. We're trying to collect community history and family research. Same thing, just they're going to be addressing a specific time period, and we're going to be going a little bit further. The University of Nottingham here is going to capture data and experience that includes stories of those left behind, the rhythm of life in Malaysia at the time, soldiers' experiences, and all the stuff that remains outside the conventional perspective of the Great War. So if anyone does have any memories of World War I, now is a great time to dig them up, and I will be very grateful because I'm hoping at some point to put on some kind of exhibition that showcases this here and a digital version of it that will link from this site. But in addition, this is a period that, because migration origins up until 1920, really most of us have lost the people that remember this directly, and we're relying on secondary stories of it. If we don't get the secondary stories now, we're going to lose them as that generation passes on. I noticed this when I was doing my research. I lost 3. And for me that was horrible because I'd only managed to interview and get one set of stories from them. They had all this experience, all this life that they'd lived, and you couldn't collect it anymore. This is one of the reasons I really want this first thing to target migrant origins up to 1920, so we get it before we lose every single access to it, because it is not recorded anywhere. After this, any stuff that I've noticed people seem to have when we've been researching in the Punjabi associations in the UK, for example, they found letters coming from the soldiers to home, or letters from home out. Memories, stories handed down in the family circle. There usually were photographs of family members in uniform, medals, because there were quite a lot of medals earned, and any magazine cuttings during the period. Propaganda. There's some great advertisements about the great Commonwealth that show a Canadian, an Australian, and in the middle an Indian Sikh. We want you. Of course, cannon fodder. And so the expert talks we're going to address predominantly are going to look at introducing oral history, so a little bit what I've talked about, but more in depth. Lives of the First World War, which is a project the Imperial War Museum has been running, which if anyone's interested in contributing to, please go ahead. I will be linking their website to our site as well, because it's a great way to think about how people talk about their history. And there's a lot of stories there that are from people who have left here, moved to the UK, and recorded their own family histories as well. Using public archives, how you actually research in an archive when you're looking for something specific. When I was doing my research, I came across the fact that my grandfather had a file in the archives, a personnel file. It was a bit of a effort to get the file, because first I had to get permission, then I had to get his birth certificate, I had to prove I was his grandchild, because your work files are classified, except to family. But you'd be surprised at what's there. It was a letter about his promotion at the time, and a back and forth of negotiating his promotion, which he'd been working the job for 2 years. To me, it's not necessarily great history, yeah? I'm not talking about the rise and fall of the great powers, but it's interesting, nevertheless, to know that these things happened, that there was some kind of discrimination if you weren't white in professions. There was the different ways people were treated. We all like to think that, and I'm sure most of you have heard this, everything was idyllic in Malaysia once upon a time. We all got along with everyone. And then suddenly this narrative changes. No one gets along with anyone, and we're all everyone for themselves. But isn't it nice to know that it's not just us who are racist, it started way back when. I find this funny. Not necessarily, but yeah.
In the meantime, what we're trying to do is these roadshows will be free. Once we start publicizing, we would like to encourage people to actually say if they're coming, because we can make sure that there'll be enough people on hand to help scan, record all the material you bring in. As well, the blog and my email are available to everyone if they want to ask questions, submit historical stories of the Sikhs, any artifacts, some story about culture, video they've taken. For the moment, what I will be posting up will be the early period material, so the first theme, the migration to World War I. Further themes, I would like to try and collect some stories about the Great Depression here and experiences, because really largely untouched again. Then we come into World War II and the Japanese occupation. In Malaysia, there's not a lot of work done on this because of our political relationship with Japan. The idea of memorializing the Japanese occupation is quite complicated. So you have to look elsewhere for the stories of what happened here, or ask people. And everyone who lived through the Japanese occupation, you can still find someone who remembers their life then. Dad was born at the start of it. Funnily enough, this is one of my profound moments in research. You don't have to live an experience to be able to tell the story. He was a baby at the start, yet he could tell me exactly what happened in his town. And it was the same story that people who were 12 and people who were 18 told me. So these stories get handed down, not just in the family, in the community, and you can share these, collect them, and you actually have something you can verify and say, one person said this, another person said this, oh look, it's the same story. Yep, we can count that as fact. Tick. There you have a history. So, submit. Anything that's not of this period, I will just keep in the database for now and then slowly start uploading them to make sure, one, I don't get overwhelmed, and two, the public who's looking at this doesn't get overwhelmed with too much information. We'll start, go through to Japanese occupation, after that to independence, the emergency, which is another point I don't think we have enough data on, living through the emergency and what it was like. So taking it up then to, say, 1969, again a period it would be nice to get the Sikh perspective on what was it like then. And then we start looking at, say, from 1970 to about 1985, and then 1985 to the 90s, because these are kind of when Malaysia starts becoming really industrialized, and when people start really leaving Malaysia. So these stories are important to record to understand where the Sikhs have gone. And finally, up until present day. What I'm hoping to get is not just history. I'm hoping that people will remember stories their grandparents told them, folk tales, the equivalent of fairy stories, superstitions, arts and crafts, what they planted, what they harvested, what they cooked, how you ate. Did you sit down on the floor? Did you sit at a table? When did it change from sitting on the floor to chop your vegetables in the kitchen to standing at the kitchen sink? All of these things are they don't seem necessarily that interesting when you think about them, but some researcher somewhere is going to thank you for putting that together, and it paints a really nice picture of a community that includes everyone and every aspect of it. So I guess that's really what I wanted to do today, and now I've talked for roughly about an hour and a bit, I think I might give you all a chance to speak. One of the big things I wanted to do today is actually canvass all of you. I've outlined what I hope to do with this project, but in the reality, the point of this project is to make it your project. Every single one of you who wants to be involved. So I'd like to know what you would like to see in it. What am I missing out? Is there something you think, a big gap you think I'm not addressing? Are there any ideas or people you think I need to speak to? Anything really, so open floor. Can they take the mic? Because that might be easier.
Okay. Whoops. Okay. Right. No, I just want to give an example. I was just talking to VG Avtar just now outside. The thing is, my father passed away a long time ago. So he said that he was a train driver during Japanese occupation. He was like 19 years old. Let's see now. Yeah, that's about right. So he used to do the train ride from Singapore to KL, and but I don't have much information about this. But when he got off the station, he used to always try and look for either the Gurdwara or Sikh home. So VG Avtar was suggesting that, well, even if you put that short story on the net or WhatsApp or whatever, somebody else might know my dad, who might have stayed in his house and said that, hey, your dad owes me 15 ringgit, so pay up or whatever, that kind of thing. So it can start from there, and then maybe the story can get bigger, right? And this is just a small example, but there would be more examples of this nature that can come alive.
We have a word for that in the younger generation. It's known as crowdsourcing. What it means is you put something up there and you hope everyone else jumps in and adds to it, whether it's fundraising, whether it's filling in the blanks in a story. And this is one of the things we do. When I have a little bit of help with the IT of the blog, I plan to put a little section where you can put snippets saying, I'm looking for anyone who remembers so-and-so, and then see who signs up and talks about it. And so it'll be kind of like a forum, like on a normal blog, but instead of that, it'll be connections and making these connections. Because one of the things I find most fascinating about our community is when you speak to anyone over the age of, say, 50, usually when you first meet someone, they will say, oh, and where are you from? And then it's followed by, oh, and who is your father? Oh, and then they start mapping you, and they can connect the dots and create a linkage of your family into their story. And for me, the way we network with each other is amazing, and it'd be great to be able to track that, to use this as leverage to build more on the history. Anyone else? Oh.
My name is Gurmukh Singh. What I would like to know is, how do you define a Sikh or a Punjabi that came in the early century or even the last century, end of last century? How would you define? Because there's a mixture of, especially among the business people, you would have a Hindu in the family on the mother's side or the father's side, and the other person is a Sikh. They'll make sure certain number of children carry Sikh names, and the other children carry the Hindu names. That was what happened among the business people in KL that I know. You have Gyan Singh, you have Dyal Chan. You'll find all these among them. So, what line do we take to define? How far do you extend? Is it a Sikh? You want a pure Sikh? Sikh
I interviewed a really interesting man talking about his father's participation in World War I. Now, we all know that the British recruited Sikhs, yeah? And they defined a Sikh as someone who followed the Khalsa appearance and prayed regularly, so which is why they gave Gurdwaras to every police and military settlement, and you always had a priest, and when you went to war you had someone carrying the Guru Granth Sahib, or a version of it, on their heads. Well,
not everyone who got recruited was necessarily a Sikh. You had lots of Brahmins, Bengalis, whatever, converting because it was lucrative, a profession. It was a great way to move, to see the world, to earn some money, regular income, you could send home, you were being brave, so your family honor was definitely going to rise, you'd send money back, they'd buy more land. So we have a lot of people who may not necessarily fit what now we come to define as Sikh. On the other hand, I have a slightly more inclusive philosophy about all of this. When there's a great historian about Punjabi history called Kushwant Singh, and I like his work. There was also Jaya and quite a few other historians talking about history of the Sikhs in the Punjab, going back quite a long time. And I remember reading a piece that talked about this idea of this normative category of a Sikh being defined as the Khalsa identity. Well, this fixed identity, this one single identity, well, it didn't exist in the Punjabi village. This comes along later on. And frankly, I think we should include the story of anyone who wanted to stand up and say, I am a Sikh. Whether or not they're mixed, whether or not they don't follow the tenets of the religion anymore, their story is still interesting, no? Why did they decide they couldn't stay? Shouldn't we learn that? So it makes it more, that more people will think about it and consider why and think maybe we have to change something to make it more inclusive. Or lessons. If your family had a brother who was called a Sikh and a sister who was then a Brahmin Hindu, why wouldn't you record both stories just to understand what it was like growing up in that household? Because that story obviously resonates with someone in the Sikh population of Malaysia. The idea is to be inclusive. I don't want to shut the doors on anyone. And I'm not limiting the story collection from Sikhs. When I was doing my research, I interviewed other communities in the other populations in the town to get a picture of what life as a Sikh was. Anyone who wants to tell us a story they know that has something to do with our history and our heritage, tell it. We're going to be moderating everything that comes online to make sure it's appropriate and trying and verifying it from the information they provide us before we publish it. Let them come. The more we get, yeah, it's going to be a lot of work to filter, but really the more we get, the better it is. Okay. I'm going to initially work on managing the site to start with. I will be requesting volunteers from the community here to get involved. The aim is to eventually create a website and archive that is managed by all of you, but that the university provides assistance in making sure the standards are met, so you're checking that it's really verifying it to make sure it's history or knowledge, and also to make sure that the proper procedures are being done to keep the data, duplicating it, backing up. So we will be working both ways. At the moment, it's quite a big chunky database, so it's there. I have it set to back up, I think 30 times a day, and it's really, the web does wonderful things nowadays. Housekeeping, I am told on this sort of website, is really easy. I will be attending a course in September as well, just to add to how I should be doing this properly, rather than using WordPress, but my center's using WordPress as well, so I thought it would work. The idea, eventually, this site you all own. I will continue to pop in and oversee it eventually, continuously over time periods, but I want to see this become a project that gets taken up by the community. The whole point of this is to make it owned by the community itself, maintained by the community itself, contributed and built by the community itself. I'm just here to help make sure it works. Does that answer your question about housekeeping sufficiently? Well, the wonderful thing about digital life, because this is largely outside the mandate of my postdoc, my funding was specifically to target World War I. We're taking it beyond that.
all the World War I memories will be backed up to the university site, so where they make sure it's being maintained and it still continues to be accessible. But part of the idea of being a Sikh community and trying to maintain and build a sort of patrimony for the next generation, this is where everyone is to kind of think maybe we should start taking responsibility before we lose all these stories. It's really not hard. It would involve someone volunteering to work for half an hour once a week and maybe having 20 or 30 someone's doing that. That's not a lot of time. Anyone who's passionate, jump up. Actually, I'm hoping from having worked with Avtar that his coalition will start building on this and organize a committee that will then start running this eventually, so I can hand it over. Anyone else who wants to volunteer, feel free to let me know.
I really like the way Dr. Narwin walked us through how to do an interview. That's what we do with our reporters, and I'm an editor of a newspaper background, so that's what we do, and I thought that was really wonderful. And just the sidetracking, one of the issues that I found when I was trying to get a few people recording their history was the age of our people. I keep hearing this thing that when they came here, the age was either pushed up or pushed down. I think that's something that probably we'll find along the way. Yeah, a suggestion. We have, I'm one of the members who started Asia Samachar, an online newspaper. Probably we can work something here, and maybe we can rope in Simran FM and the others to institutionalize the thing, because I still feel that if everybody doing it, it ends up nobody doing it, because Avtar is involved in maybe 500 projects, So and those are the projects that I know of. I don't know what else is, what else. So it will not, and it will not be fair to just put it there, because their hands are already full. The coalition is already doing so many things, and actually sometimes they're not doing enough because they can't even do what they're supposed to do. So this is a new thing, a new venture. So we have to look at other ways. So maybe Asia Samachar, Simran FM, and all that, we can come in and we can see how we can help. The other one was. I had another one, I forgot now. Oh yeah, let's have a story competition to really get people excited. And I think you have a way you can actually communicate with younger people. If we can get our children who are, say, in the teens, the competition we've shown for the teens. I mean, I have a daughter who's 16. I mean, it would be exciting if I can get her to write about history, the family history. I tried with my daughter once. I told her a story. I told her how her grandfather came to from Punjab to Malaya. Then I told her, then he went back, and then he brought her grandfather, my father. He was 14 years old at that time when he was brought here, and my daughter was 14. So I thought this is like a really good story to tell her, and she's going to get touched, and she's really going to get like bowled over. The father telling her about. She's at 14, how her grandfather came to Malaya at the age of 14. I'm telling her the whole story and all that, how, imagine the situation, ride of the boat, how difficult and all. And at the end of that 40-minute session, I said, so how do you think you would have felt if you had come on that boat? Papa, all I want is, on my first day, I want a room, make sure the hotel has an aircon and Wi-Fi. I almost flipped. I says, there goes the history lesson. But if you can inspire her to capture that story, and maybe we can bundle it with some kind of competition and all that, and if we can inspire our other 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, to actually do that, that would be a real great thing for us as parents, grandparents, and families. And that's one suggestion. And I think we can get prizes. We can work that out. I think I can work that out. We can work that out, and that will really drive people to do something here. Malaysia Samachar itself, I've tried getting people to write their family histories, their own family. I've been talking to people for a few months now. Very difficult. I meet the same person 2 months later. I owe you something. I owe you something. See, yeah, it's your story, not mine. And it's really difficult because I find people generally in this part of the world, people generally don't write. They are okay on Facebook. Write, but when you ask them to write something a bit more than that, they just jam up. I don't know what. That's the experience that we've had when we try to get people to write.
One of the things that I'm really passionate about doing with this project is getting as many young people involved. For me, having kids from the age of 10 to say 25 involved in a project like this means that you're ensuring that the next generation is there to look after it when we're not around. They have to want to be interested in the community history. They have to want to know what happened. And the more people who are at that age who are willing to sit there and go, okay, I'll go dig out a history. For one thing, they have the added bonus. They have the tech skills. They know how to search online. They know how to use email. They know how to upload. As many of the youth that you can get involved in this, that is your resource eventually when I hand this project over to you guys to start running it, to looking after it. I would really be thinking, when you mentioned working with the SimranTV and Asia Samachar to run this, I would be thinking of getting yourself a team of cadets almost to play with this, because let them run it eventually. And the story competition, sure, willing to help whenever I can. Small hitch, I don't actually live in Malaysia full time at the moment. I'm back and forthing. I'm always available in emails. My time difference may mean your answer may be 12 hours later, but I usually respond an email from within an hour when I download them. I hate full inboxes. Academics. So happy to record stuff online, happy to do anything over Skype, happy to work YouTube or whatever out with you guys to run this. Let me know what you need and I'll see how we make it happen.
Good evening. I am Narendra Singh. And well said, Habajan, but I beat you one to it. That's why I ran off and brought my daughter. She does 3D animation. Perhaps she can come up with some nice cartoon. And I have many times tried to bring them to the temple, but sad enough, they always complain. Want to say what you complain? They have always been put down and, a little bit of talk, so they tend to run away. So I had to con her to come here now. So many times we went for some function. Sometimes they have to do SEVA. This is not the way. You got to give them, you got to open up and tell them how to do instead of criticizing. Young generation, young people tend to walk off. Sad to say, or happy to say, I don't know. I am, my wife is a Thai, so she's a bit mixed. I hope I'm not mixed up here. It's the hardest thing to say now. Should I? No, I'm from KL. But I've been all over, up, down, east, west. East, west, Sabah, Sarawak, Labuan. I used to work in the rig. Anyway, she's going to settle down soon. So one of the reasons is to approach whether it's acceptable or not. I want to get her married in a Sikh temple, so that is one of my objectives, to also come here. So hopefully we can discuss this. Thank you.
Sorry, sadly that one I'm going to have to apologize and say I'm not actually qualified to handle. I guess this is something you probably have committee meetings to raise at. I'm an academic. I deal with the
digging up history and old stories, and policy, not really something us academics are great with. So maybe that one could come up some other time with the committee. Yeah. Anyone else? No?
Hi, I'm Harmeet, Moni's son. Thank you so much for coming here and starting this off. This is amazing, honestly. It is. I think it's about time. It's probably past due, but it's something we have to do immediately. And I also actually had this idea a while back of setting up an intelligence unit where besides of just history and stories and things like this, we look into statistics, so we get overtime, and that can reflect our modern era. We can learn from it, collect data, find rates of divorce, things like this, and then we know what to work on. Besides, the numbers aren't quite exact. The last census was a while back, so it's intelligence that we really need. I'm really passionate about this. I've been trying to dig history up for a while now, and this is perfect opportunity for me. I honestly feel like dropping out of college and doing this full time. Yeah, but it's just a thought. Huh? Yeah. Also things like I'm very interested with modern day history, or history that's not so old, things that we can, because very soon it's all going to go. Things like how our associations came about, how the activities that were carried out, also economic prosperity, entrepreneurs, how suddenly there's a huge surge in the numbers of Sikhs in the oil and gas industry. We can have things like this that it's not really, it won't really be looked upon as history, but it's something that it's not the common man term of history, but it's something. Sikh time, okay, yeah. But I guess it's just it's part of parcel of the entire intelligence. Vaguely, yes. Yes, I do. 1910 on my mother's side and 1918 on my father's side. Police officer and businessman. Yes. What else? Yeah, that's about it now.
Sorry, I know I bang on a lot about history because really that's my area, but the whole point of calling the website Sikh Heritage and Culture is so that we kind of address a broader picture, not just history, but the idea of sociology, economics, all the different things that put together a picture of what a community is like. What you're talking about is with taking numbers, questionnaires, census data, essentially. You're talking about sociology. I think that's valued and important. If you want to get a group of people together, when I'm next back in KL, I'd be happy to run a training session on how you'd actually go about collecting the data and show you how you would collate it. It's stuff you learn in university in courses called research methods, which they run in every faculty. Do not drop out of university. It was from the numbers from the last census when I looked up. I may have got it wrong because I also played with I think it was about 30 years of censuses and I moved around a lot. But I remember it was roughly around 140,000, and I remember there was a bit of an argument about it at the time, but the number was there and it was definitely less than the Iranian migrants. I might wrap up now if no one else has anything to add, just because I'm conscious of that. I've already kept you all for more than 2 hours with starting late, and I'm sure everyone has families to go to. It's a Monday night.
Okay, Dr. Narvin, or she likes me to call her Veena. Veena has said that the Iranians have overtaken us. Everybody else, the Indonesians, the Myanmaris, the Bangladeshis, now 1.5 million coming on. everybody has overtaken us. So we are now not the 4th or the 5th or the 6th or 7th, but probably be the 20th in numbers in the country. Okay, anyway, the point is that I think we are lucky to have this session today, and we are lucky to have Veena with us, right? And she has aroused enough interest to see so many people here today. On the Facebook, on the WhatsApp and all that, only got 3 people saying they are coming. So that was a bit of a so thank God that so many of you have come. Wonderful. And thank you to Indy for doing this live broadcast. I've been getting people sending me WhatsApp messages and all that. Wonderful. So people are actually following this. Oh, okay. 28 people. Many of them still don't know that it's going on. Right. So the next session I think is a repeat of this one. It's going to be on the 26th in Sabah House, Sunday, Sabah House, 3 to 5. So if you have forgotten whatever transpired here and you want to refresh your memory, you are welcome to come to Sabah House, and maybe also pass the word around to others who missed this session and tell them to come and attend the Sabah House session on Sunday. So Sunday regarding the points raised by Paji and all of you, I think yes, Harmeet, you got to motivate more people of your age, alright, those who are going to college or just finished college, alright, and get them to start working on this. Okay, wonderful. We have young people coming here. Sharinda, is it? Sharinda as well, and the young people at the back. Those with black beards, I consider young, lah. Okay, so please. This is our project, alright. We have all got to make it work, alright. Otherwise, nothing happens. So let's push this forward. Where this is going to be parked and all that, we will meet and discuss. That is very important also, because many people set up websites and then they just fizzle out. Alright, nothing happens after that. So this cannot be allowed to go down that road. This has to be maintained. This has to be kept alive forever, right? So we have to think about it very carefully. Sure. Yes. Correct. Yes. Correct. Festival and all that. Yes. Sure. Correct. Yes. Yes. Correct. Correct. Yes. Yeah. Sure. Sure. Definitely. Yes. Correct. Correct. Right. Very good. Take it. Take it. Right. There's no problem. I think we'll have to do that. We have to capture every function that is coming up now and do some publicity there and promote this project. I was quite touched in the sense that recently, over the last few days, since publicizing this thing, people have called me and they say that, yeah, I've been trying to talk to my grandmother, I've been trying to talk to my mother, and I've spoken to her, and she told me this story, but I didn't record it. Now I must record it, So that kind of things, people are now talking about it already. So that is something that is really, really important. That something that is happening. People are already aware of this. People are already moving in this direction. So it's wonderful. We have to push everybody. We have to get everybody to act on it. And I think the idea of having a sort of a story competition or a family history competition or something like that will be good. People will write and we can get some stories out of them. We have to think of many other ways, right? Out of the box kind of thing, and let's see how we can get people to do this. So having said all that, I will pass this mic back to Rina to round up. And from us, thank you very much for coming. Please do follow up on the Facebook and all that. Wherever the roadshows are going to be, we will need all your support fully. Thank you.
I'd like to very much echo Arthurji's words, because for me, having the turnout, having this many people interested, it's great. This is stuff I'm passionate about, not necessarily what everyone else is passionate about. And you have no idea how many times as a PhD student, when you explain your research, people suddenly have this blank, glazed look on their face. The fact that all of you think this is a cool idea and want to get involved is great, and I hope we can keep running these and start collecting stuff. I can't access the Wi-Fi, so I'm not able to show you the website. It's really simple. Sikh Heritage Malaysia, all as one word.com. It's a blog. At the moment, it has just the starting page introducing what the project is. SikhHeritageMalaysia.com. All one word, that's it. And as we go on, what I'm going to start doing is, for my post, I'll be posting little how-tos. So what apps you could use to record someone, how you would run an interview, how you scan a photograph, little things like that, just so the how-tos are there for people to use. There is currently a form on the website that you can click on and submit your story or your photograph or any other image if you're capturing an object, for example, and it will go up, and I will be able to make sure it goes live after calling you probably, or verifying it with you via email to check the veracity of the object. But that's pretty much it. Send stuff in. I have a question for you, because you've been recording this as a live broadcast on for the lovely people on SimranTV. Is it not possible to use this to broadcast at the multiple events you were talking about? You could use snippets from this and someone else talking to promote it at different events through the year. So, anyway, really don't want to keep you all anymore. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope to see your friends on Sunday.